There you go.
So I think hopefully everyone heard that. The recording's started, and I'll stop my screen share so you can start yours.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Really appreciate you all. And we're going to get this show on the road. I'm going to start by sharing my screen real quick and get that going. There we go. And share. Can everybody see this? Good. I get some yeses. Very good. Nikki and Christine, I'll let you admit everybody on the in the room, but today I'm going to talk about horizontal and natural beekeeping. So two of my favorite subjects is actually what defines my passion in beekeeping. And I'm basically a master beekeeper with the state of Texas. I've done a lot of community outreach and have been active in my community, my beekeeping community throughout Texas. I also host a natural beekeeping corner on the Hive podcast. I'm actually have become the co-host of that podcast lately. So if you're interested in some more natural beekeeping talks, that's one resource that you can look into. I work with Les Crowder. He's written the very famous book on tabar beekeeping, Organic Practices for Honeybee Health. And I have also been a supporter of Bees Abroad. I'm actually twinning with 4 different programs right now, and I encourage you to do the same. This is amazing, an amazing way to support communities that can learn beekeeping through your support and generate income, a sustainable income for their families throughout the world, including in the US and various countries around the world. So again, I focus on horizontal tabar hives. Those are what they look like in our, according to our plans. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about what has come in first as far as hives and people keeping bees in hive boxes. And really, it started with the Greeks thousands of years ago, where they used to put bees in baskets and using top slats to let the bees hang the combs from. So horizontal tabar beekeeping is a concept that's been around for thousands of years, really. It's nothing new. What is new, though, is the adaptations that we've made in the recent 200-300 years to adapt them to various terrains. And their attraction is that they're really flexible and adaptable and can be made with all kinds of different materials. And that makes them really ideal for countries all over the world, but also, you know, we can make them out of wood and we can make them as complicated as we want. So they're very, very versatile in effect. Very briefly, I was hired in 2019 by the government of the Republic of the Congo to do to design and lead their beekeeping training programs throughout the country, because I was using tabar hives and accessorily I was speaking French as well. But we worked with a lot of people in this setup, teaching apiaries there, and then COVID hit. But that makes them really adapted to really very basic conditions on the ground. I've worked a lot on community outreach, and we've built hives with youngsters and women, and in Nigerian as well, we've spearheaded programs to train people with horizontal tabar hives. So what I want to do today throughout this presentation is to really try to identify cost savings, efficiencies, and simplifications in everybody's beekeeping practices. And if you haven't tried tabar hives yet, my goal is to try to entice you to at least try them. And if you're starting in beekeeping, I highly recommend you to give that a shot instead of other hives, because they're very easy to manage and cost efficient. So when we talk about beekeeping, we talk a lot about frame beekeeping, which is the default for commercial beekeepers, and what a lot of the clubs and the literature is promoting is the frame-based Langstroth, or in the UK, I forget what the name is. There's Langstroth, Dadant, there's all kinds of frame-based vertical stacked hives that are being used in commercial contexts, but also in backyard contexts. And the way these work, and I'm going to specifically focus on the Langstroth because that's what we use in the United States where I'm located. And we use those frames and also the foundation inside the frames to sustain the comb and make them a little bit more practical to move around and manipulate without destroying the comb. And boxes are either 5 frame, 10 frames, or 8 frame. And they are of various heights, meaning you have deeps, mediums, and shallows. So while the goal is to really make them very universal and standardized, if you don't have the same size equipment, they're not as interchangeable as you would think, because a 5 frame box is not going to fit on a 10 frame box, and a deep frame is not going to fit in a medium super kind of a thing. So that's one of the aspects of the standardizations. That's it's got pros and cons. In the United States, we have a lot of commercial pollination routes, and we migrate those beehives throughout the country on large semis, trucks, and to basically chase the bloom, the crops that we're trying to pollinate. And so those boxes, being square and stackable, are very transportable. They can be stacked and moved around with forklifts and loaded up on semis. And then they're set up, in commercial conditions by the thousands near the crops that they are meant to be pollinating. They have, however, some issues that are pertaining mostly to the vertical management, between the bird's nest being spread between 2 boxes stacked on top of each other, between the when you fail to put another box on top and the bees are running out of space, they might build comb between the boxes or under the inner covers at the top of the stack, and you might end up with burr comb basically tying everything together, frames on top of each other, or in this case, in the center image, you could see how they try to store some honey, and when you lift up that cover, that rips out the comb, and the honey is leaking all over the colony, basically potentially drowning your queen. And the other aspect of that is that when you open up a box, a square stackable box, you are taking out the entire roof open, and you're exposing all the bees and the nest, and that makes it both intimidating and also unnerving for the bees. And the other aspect is that it can be very heavy. We don't use a lot of shallows. I don't know, in the UK, we use mostly deeps and supers, and they can get really heavy to lift and move around. Here you've got 90 pounds for a deep super 10 frame, but really for a 10 frame deep super, you probably can go easily up to 100, 110 pounds. And that makes it backbreaking. That makes it really daunting to go and inspect your hives when they're larger, especially. First year, you might get away with it, but after that, as they grow, it becomes a little bit more heavy. Then the advantage is that you can process the frames in extractors. So you still have to do a whole lot of work. So you have to uncap, and you have to spin them into the extractors, the spinners, and then you have to bring them back to the yards. This is another trip. So there's a trade-off to that practicality. That means you have to come back and put the boxes. What happens too is when you're out of the season, about 9-10 months out of the year, you've got to store those empty boxes, those supers, and those frames that were going in there, and protect them from mice and wax moths and all kinds of things. So that's a long time, a long portion of your beekeeping year to have to stack all those boxes and find storage space for them. Another aspect of vertical management is the chimney effect that takes place both in the winter and the summer, where in the winter you have that warm air that rises above the brood's nests and hits the top. That tends to be colder, so you might have condensation created. At the very least, your brood's nest is not keeping the heat right where it needs it around the bees, and it's lost to the stack. Basically, it rises above the brood's nest, so that makes it a little bit less efficient. And the opposite effect kind of happens in the summer, where they're having a harder time keeping the brood's nest cool because the colder air is pushed out of the hive, and the warm air is hitting the top. All that to say that basically that's kind of back-breaking work, and it's well adapted to commercial beekeeping practices, but it's also an expensive investment, and I'm going to show you kind of how much more so that is. And it's maybe not so well adapted to backyard beekeepers. So there really are other ways to raise bees, or to, in some cases, some of you might be interested in making some money with your honey or your bees. And there are other ways to do this. So I like to say, basically, it's nice to work smarter, not harder. And to keep in mind that unless you want to be a commercial beekeeper, like in the United States, that's less than 1 out of 100 of us. 94% of the beekeepers in the United States are actually backyard beekeepers. And I believe that's the same in the UK, even more so in the UK, where you have the vast majority of beekeepers being small scale, backyard homesteaders, beekeepers. So with that in mind, we have other options to keep our bees. So first, it behooves us to remind you guys what's the organization of a natural honeybee nest. And typically what we are told is that it's a vertical arrangement in a tree trunk in a cavity, and that it has the honey at the top, the pollen envelope around the brood's nests, and that the bees kind of go up in the winter, eating through the honey, and then push down the brood's nest in the growing season as they start storing honey on top of the brood's nest. But that's one of the configurations. And in reality, all kinds of configurations happen, vertical and horizontal, whether that tree cavity is from a fallen tree, or it's in a hollow branch, or it's in different kind of cavity, either in a man-made structure, or anything goes. The bees are just opportunistic, and they just enjoy finding a home that's going to be mostly dry, mostly protected, with an entrance that's defendable, and a cavity that's basically adapted to their needs. It doesn't mean it has to be vertical. As a matter of fact, when beekeepers do removals, about 80% of the removals that they've observed, and I've got some really good friends that do this for a living, and they're telling me basically 80% of those configurations are horizontal. So I'm not saying there's a preference. According to Dr. Seeley's research, there's not really necessarily a preference on vertical versus horizontal, but I'm here to argue that if there is a preference, it's actually not vertical. And horizontal is just as good for the bees, if not better. So how does that work? Well, as long as you respect bee space, which is 1 3/8 of an inch between the edges of your either bar or Langstroth frames, shoulder to shoulder, or any of the frames that you're using that might be cell spacing, the bees will build 1 comb per bar or frame, and they will have enough space between the combs to move around and tend to each side of the comb. As long as you respect that bee space, you can do pretty much anything you want and still have that hive inspectable. So there's several types of hives that backyard beekeepers use readily, and some of the main styles are Langstroth lay-ins, which is extra deep frames, horizontal hives, long langs, which are horizontal version of a Langstroth, and then top bars. And when I say Langstroth, I really mean any kind of frames that looks like a Langstroth. I forget again. Christine, do you know, or Nikki, do you know the name of the frames, the hives? I think it's, it doesn't matter. But anyway, I don't mean to be all about the US. It's all frames that fit this kind of stackable vertical profile. And so the features that I'm looking at here are the kind of features that are important for beekeepers, whether they're standardization, transportability, commercial use or not, storage needed or not, bee space, respect, honey production, the complexity of management, the insulation of the hive box, and the amount of stress that the bees can be submitted to, as well as how easy it is to build them for yourself, if there's heavy lifting or not, and then if the bees are available. And so when we look at
national in the UK.
what did you say?
It's national in the UK.
Thank you. I was like, I kept thinking about that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
It was bothering me. Thank you, national. So here we're now going to look at those lay-ins and long lengths. What we're going to compare is either national or Langstroth and top bar. And what we see is that in this comparison, the top bar takes the cake with being lighter, easier to manage, having better thermodynamics, not having that chimney effect, and having the ability to have thicker walls because it's a horizontal configuration. So the thermodynamics are a lot better. And because there's less disruption of the brood's nests, the bees are actually usually calmer, and those hives are much more budget friendly. Don't take my word for it though, because we're going to look at a quick comparison of what it costs to make frames versus bars if you were to make them yourself. And we're going to look at the Langstroth or National. I don't know what the pricing is in the UK. And the horizontal frameless hives. When I say frameless, that means top bar, basically. There's only the top bar that the bees are building the comb from instead of having a full frame around it. And to exaggerate the difference, I'm going to look at 100 colonies. So if you were to want to start with 100 colonies, you would get those kinds of numbers. If you want just 10, you divide what I'm showing you by 10. So for Langstroth, for each of the boxes, you would need 30 frames per bar, and that would cost you about $40. But you would need about 3 of those boxes for a full-size colony, so that would cost you $120. And then for 100, you multiply that by 100, so that would give you $12,000. And those are the life expectancy of that equipment is on average about 5 years. And that means after 15 years, you multiply this by 3, that costs by 3, and that costs you about $36,000. Now, if we look at the horizontal top bar hives, each of those bars are really cheap to make from bought materials. They are even, you can make them from reclaimed materials for basically zero. They're really easy, just a piece of wood that you cut. And there's no frames, complicated assemblies or complicated cuts of any kind. It's a super fast, super easy way to make a bar. And so for each colony full size, you can, that's how much a full top bar hive would take. If you were to put 2 colonies in there, it would cost you only half of that. And because of the horizontal configuration, you can actually put 2 colonies in each of those hives. That means for 100 colonies, you would end up with $500 of cost for those bars. And they're just sticks of wood, so they would last 15 years at least, if not more. And that means your cost after 15 years would be basically $35,000 less than with the framed hive in the United States. So for a full 300 colonies and a full setup, including the boxes, that would basically represent, after 15 years, close to $200,000, definitely a lot more than 150. So we don't ever look at that kind of comparison when we make our decisions when choosing hives, but I think it behooves us to really kind of keep that in mind, because it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot more cost effective than having Langstroth frames or national frames to use top bars. So let's look a little bit at what a horizontal frameless hive is. I like to call that better beekeeping for the bees and the beekeeper's back, because you're not lifting anything, and budget, because it's much more cost efficient. It's also makes for calmer bees and therefore a little bit more healthier because of it. Oh, there's a book in that's been published by Dr. Sharashkin and Fedor Lazutin, and it's called Beekeeping with a Smile. I like to call horizontal top bar hives Beekeeping with a Smile. But basically, the principles are very simple. If you see the hive, the horizontal hives is worked at waist level. There's no bending down and up. Each comb is lifted individually, and therefore there's no heavy lifting, not much more than 6 pounds or so. The bars, so if you look at the picture on the left, all the bars are touching, forming the roof of the cavity, and the bees are entering through the one entrance. In this case, you can see on the orange disc entrance, there's an entrance that's the only way for the bees to get in and out. So when you remove the rain cover, your bees are still enclosed in your hive and they're not open. And then when you want to inspect the hive, you start usually at the back of it, away from the entrance, and you will move the bars one by one, and you can lift them one by one, and only expose one side of each of the two combs that you have the opening at. So that means your bird's nest is very protected, and you're only exposing a full comb at a time. And the bees are a lot calmer because you're starting in the back of the hive, away from the entrance. That means there's no guard bees, there's much fewer bees. And again, you're not exposing the bird's nest and upsetting your colony or stressing it out. Because when you open a Langstroth or a national hive, you're basically letting all the air, humidity and temperature, even the propolis vapor compounds, all that gets disrupted and escapes the hive. That means the bees are going to have to work that much harder to reinstate homeostasis, which is the balance of those factors. And anything that makes the bees work harder is a cost to the colony that's getting paid usually in amount of honey production. So there's always a trade-off there. So that's the principle of the tabar hives and how it works. Not all tabar hives are created equal. You have some kits that are made in China that are lightweight, thin, and poor quality. So just be mindful that unless you can find good quality equipment where you are, it's usually recommended to try and build it for yourself, because thickness of the wood, for example, is very important. So on the left, you see one that's got a 3/4 of an inch thick wood. It's also much deeper and narrower than our hive planes that we'll talk about. And on the right, you see there's a 1.5 inch thick wood. So there's twice the insulation around the nest in the colony. So that matters because it's all about the insulation as well. You want to make sure that your bees are afforded some thermal mass and insulation. That will absorb the variations of temperatures and make it a lot less stressful for them to transition from one temperature to the other, as things are a lot more progressive rather than sharp differences in temperatures at once. That would be more the case in thinner or less insulated hives. The other aspect of the horizontal tabar hives that is very beneficial to the bees is the ability to foster the use of natural wax. And so foundation, I didn't go into depth about that, but basically foundation has some drawbacks. While it provides stability to the comb for the purpose of for the benefit of the beekeeper, for the bees is a huge drawback, because first it's introducing stiffness to the comb that might be potentially dampening the communication messages. Remember, the bees are using vibrations to communicate in the dark of the hive while they dance. And so that stiffness might negatively impact that communication efficiency, which again is introducing a cost in terms of probably amount of honey storage. And the other thing with foundation is that the cells are usually larger than what the bees would otherwise build if left to their own devices. In the United States, it's like 5.4 millimeters for standard foundation. And the bees left to their own devices typically will build various size cells, anywhere from 4.5 to 4.9 millimeters, which is a lot smaller for the workers especially than the standard foundation. That means that when you're using larger foundation, you tend to introduce longer gestation periods for the pupae, which means the mites, the varroa mites, have a longer time to produce fertile mites, daughter mites. So that's a negative impact of using foundation that having natural wax will mitigate. Also, the optimal organization of a honeybee nest introduces the configuration that includes larger cells at the top of the comb to store honey, drone cells around the brood's nest that helps later with the storage of honey, because those cells are larger and therefore they store more honey more efficiently later. Also, the drone cells being around the worker brood provides an insulation layer to the workers' bees. So all that taken into account makes for a more optimal configuration of the brood's nest. And also what I want to point out when it comes to the vertical organization that stackable boxes introduces is that if you look at the top right picture here, bees tend to build from top attachment sideways and downways. They don't ever add an empty space above their head that adds a lot of stress to their thermodynamics, because now they have to reestablish a lot of the conditions. It's like having a large house and all of a sudden you're putting in a second floor at the top that's empty, and you have to furnish it, you have to do all kinds of things and keep it warm as well, right? So that kind of needs to be taken into account when you're doing vertical beekeeping. And I would argue if you're going to do vertical beekeeping, you could still do natural comb in frames, and you can still under super, meaning putting your new empty boxes underneath the stack instead of the top. So that's a side remark there. So let's talk about the horizontal expansion that the horizontal top-bar hives are basically leveraging. And so imagine a cavity like a fallen tree, and the bees are just building their combs, and they'll start usually at one side. Like the entrance is going to be on the bottom left here. So the bees are going to move in and they're going to start building some comb for the bird's nest initially. And once they've got enough bird's nest comb, usually they'll have a comb of honey at the front by the entrance on the left here, and maybe a comb of pollen, and then all those combs of bird's nests, and another comb of pollen on the other side of the bird's nest, because remember, the bird's nest is sandwiched between pollen and food. And then they'll start building surplus combs and store surplus honey in the back. So this is what it's going to look like with the pollen comb sandwiching the bird's nest and the honey stores in the back. The entrance being again at the bottom left. So what that means is that this is now an optimal configuration for the bees, which is great for their health. It's better for their health. But also you have the possibility to smoke a little bit the entrance on the bottom left, and then open up the bars and the back on the top right to walk your way back towards the bird's nest and inspect your hive that way. So it's very easy to, and that's the usual configuration. When you have the entrance on one bottom side like this, the bees will typically always, and I know beekeeping, you can always say always, but typically this is your bird's nest configuration, your colony configuration. So you'll know exactly how much honey stores are in that colony by just going through those last few combs on the right, the honey stores. You'll know if they have pollen, if they're bringing in pollen really quickly, and you haven't even opened the bird's nest yet. And then you'll hit the bird's nest and you'll be able to see if they're eggs and young larvae or pupae through observation of the first couple combs of that bird's nest on the right side there, right? That means you have, unless you're doing something specific like splitting or not sure that the queen is in there and you're hunting down for her, you don't have to look for that queen. You don't have to go through that bird's nest. You can quickly go in and just get an assessment and close it back without disrupting the bees, which is ideal for them. They don't have to re-establish humidity, temperature, propolis compounds. They don't have to worry about you. That doesn't set them back a few hours, if not days, like when you're going and inspecting through vertical stacked hives. Obviously, when the nectar flow is on, the expansion will be towards the back of the hive, which the back of the hive to me is away from the entrance, so towards the right here. And then when there's a dearth, the colony will contract back towards the entrance. And this is a cycle that repeats every season, every year. And it makes it very easy to assess your colony health and to know where your honey stores are and where your bird's nests are. The other thing that is going to make that that's going to simplify our life with a horizontal configuration like this is that you can easily make splits if you're trying to prevent swarming and you're leveraging the swarming instinct of the bees to make your splits, which is another tenet, by the way, of natural beekeeping. Natural treatment-free beekeeping is leveraging the natural instincts of the bees to make splits and harvest those swarms preemptively to increase your numbers in your apiary and make up any potential losses coming down the road. So all you have to do here is remove the same way you would do a split in a vertical or any hive, you would remove in the right season, which is nectar flow usually, as the colony is getting congested and is making preparations for swarming. You could remove 1 or 2 combs of food, 1 or 2 combs of brood, and put that in another box with your queen to really imitate the way the bees do it, and then squeeze the colony back together and add the missing bars in the back of the hive to make up for the ones that you've removed. So that management is very, very easy when you do it horizontally. It makes it much more accessible to anyone with very basic beekeeping knowledge, bee biology knowledge. The way you would harvest honey is twofold. You could take out a bar with a full comb of honey and take it home and do cut comb. And then all you would have to do at that point is replace the bar that you took out of the hive, and the bees will replace that comb and rebuild it if you're in a period of expansion. It is important to note that if you're going to remove any comb or introduce an empty bar in a colony of bees, top bar hives, you want to make sure that you introduce that bar, if possible, between 2 drawn existing combs of either brood or food, so that the bees will have no other way to rebuild but straight between those 2 straight combs. So that's one of the strategies that we use a lot. And when you remove the honeycomb like this, that's beautiful, you can put that bar, that empty bar, back between 2 straight combs as well. Comb honey is worth a whole lot more when you sell your honey than liquid honey. It takes also a whole lot less work because all you're doing is cutting the sections of natural comb and putting them in boxes. And there's very little cleanup. You can use kitchen utensils and doesn't require a spinner, an extractor, or anything like that. In the United States, about 4 to 5 inch square of cut comb will sell for about $45, as opposed to the equivalent of liquid honey would probably be about $20, if even that. So that's an easy way to make some out of your honey if you're in limited quantities, especially. The other way to harvest honey is, you can see in the center picture, is to take the bar with the honey and cut the comb into a bucket and replace the bar, as you can see on the right side, directly back into the hive and close the hive. Once you have your bucket home, you can crush and strain and extract liquid honey that way. So again, comb honey is a delicacy. It's a prize because it is there's hardly any way to adulterate comb honey. It comes straight from the hive. Now, Chinese companies, beekeeping companies, have found a way to pump their bees full of sugar and have them produce funny honey, which is the bees packaging the sugar syrup into comb honey. But in theory and most of the time, this is like a good product that's evidently coming straight out of a hive, and customers appreciate that for what it's worth. You can also produce chunk honey if you're looking for niches, by the way, whether it's comb honey or chunk honey, which is the mixing of comb honey in liquid honey. You have a niche market that's not as exploited, and you're not competing with everybody else that's selling liquid honey that might have been imported from other countries or adulterated more easily with. So keep that in mind. And also, top bar hives produce a whole lot of beeswax for your salves and balms and candles and soaps. That is the leftover. When you do crush and strain, you can recuperate that beeswax and make all those products. By the way, liquid honey is thought of being the one way to generate the most amount of money out of a hive, and everybody is trying to increase their production of liquid honey. But in reality, there are a lot more products of the hives that have a much higher margin of profit, including the ones that I just mentioned. So There's a trade-off of, yes, you might not make as much liquid honey sometimes, but you make a whole lot more in profit from those other products if that's what you're looking for. Soaps are very popular, by the way, and it takes very little beeswax to make those, and that's another source of income with beekeeping. So if I have convinced you, or even if you're not quite there yet, just know that making those hives yourselves or on the in the fields, any country in the world, is actually fairly easy, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. So we have on our website free, easy, do-it-yourself plans that take about less than 2 hours, less than $50. And you can put 2 colonies by using a center divider and 2 separate entrances. So if you're interested in trying those out, I encourage you to go to our website and download those plans and try it out for yourself. You know, you don't have to take my word for any of the things that I've said. You could just try it for yourself using reclaimed lumber for free and a couple of hours at a time, or just very little in financial investment. It takes very little time. Before I show you how to do that real quick, there's a important consideration. I know there's a lot of Tabar Hive plans out there. Most of them have a steeper angle than the blue line is our plans. They have a longer top attachment of the comb, and the angle on the side is 30 degree. And that means that the blue center of gravity is higher, and the comb is much more structurally strong and less prone to collapse. If you take, there's a lot of plants from Christy Hemingway, Phil Chandler, a lot of top art plants are using a much steeper angle with a deeper depth of the comb and a shorter attachment at the top. That's the red one. That means the center of gravity, the red one, is lower. And that also means that the comb tends to collapse a lot more because it's pulling down on that comb and there's not as much attachment at the top. Also, that means that the red angles here are much more prone to attaching to the side of the hive body. So not all Tabar Hive plans are created equal. So if you are really wanting to have an easier way to manage your Tabar hives, I would recommend using the 30-degree angle and shallower depth that our plans are advocating. And it really only takes 3 boards, a few screws, a drill, a rain cover, and a saw. And if you want to make it easier on yourself, I forgot now what that's called. A table saw. A table saw will make it a lot easier for cutting your bars. I use that all the time, and now I drew a blank. But it's really super easy, and it's so easy that even children can assemble those really easy. We assemble them upside down, and it's an important consideration. We use support screws on each end to build it upside down to make sure that we have the same depth for each of those hives and the same internal dimensions. And the goal here is to create a standard. So one of the drawbacks of Tabar hives is not having a standardization of the different plans, which means the combs are not easily interchangeable and it's less easy to find nukes. However, if you follow these plans, you are following a standard that we're creating and spreading across the world that's going to allow you to both find nukes more easily, because we're more and more people are building these, and also you can sell your nukes or sell your hive more easily. One of the considerations that because you're using a horizontal configuration, you can put 2 colonies in one. You could actually put more than 1 colony in one box. But I don't recommend it because then they get too congested too fast and they'll swarm. That's basically the hive itself is a trough, right? And if you use that center partition and you make sure that the 2 colonies on each side are not communicating, you can use some caulk or some wood glue to make sure that that partition is not allowing for gaps. You're going to have 1 colony on each side, each coming out on each of the sides of the hive. And that volume of the hive is what the bees have shown to prefer in nature, according to Dr. Seeley's research in a little bit less than 10 gallons. So that makes for healthier bees too. Now, if you want more honey production and you want to push your bees to grow a lot bigger, you can remove that center partition and give them a single trough cavity, basically. So it's very versatile from that standpoint. And what's more economical and easier is to host 2 colonies in one box that way. So less effort to have 2 colonies in there. And by the way, when you congest them into those about not quite 10 gallons each, they will be more prone to swarming in the spring. That means you can leverage that to grow your apiary faster than if you had them in one single hive. You could potentially, if you wanted, use that center partition if you had only 1 colony in the box as a follower board. However, we do not use those because we find that the bees do just fine. You don't have a chimney effect. You don't need a follower board. And if you're using your combs as straight guides, then that's what your follower board is, a comb of honey, basically. So this is me building one on the top of a roof in a store near Austin. And you can see I'm assembling it upside down, again, for that depth. And I went fancy and stained it and put some legs, but it really doesn't take very long to assemble. It's basically a trough. And in this case, I'm using some wooden legs. It could be set up on a table, cinder blocks, or anything like that. And these are very simple legs that you can attach at the end very quickly. And then you can put any kind of rain cover on top that you want. And you can design it domed, you can design it flat, you can design it whichever way you want. And it's super easy to do. You can use a basic roof that's basically tied down with a tie or a ratcheting strap to your hive as a rain cover. You can make it hinged so that you have also, by the way, airflow on top of the bars, which is important in hotter climates. Or you could slide insulation on top of your bars more easily. You can enclose that hinged roof a little bit more if you wanted to. There's different designs. This is what we used to call the deluxe, and there's all kinds of this, some of our students' roofs. It's very versatile, basically. One of the aspects of the horizontal top-out hives is you're not crushing bees the way you do when you're using stackable boxes, because there's no contact, there's very little contact point between the bar and the hive body. So at the bottom, this is what it looks like when you use our plans, where the bees can escape on each side. Those are drawings by Les Crowder, by the way, and that's his handwriting. So you can the bee will go, and there's a little tiny point of contact that touches the bar, and the bee can quickly escape and not get crushed between flat surfaces. So don't take the extra step of cutting in the top drawing, cutting a flat surface. First of all, it's more work. And also by putting 2 flat surfaces against each other, you're creating more crush zones. And that makes the bees mad when you crush their sisters, right? So the bars are very easy to close back without crushing any bees. And that's one of the advantages of that. You can also work those bars with just one hand, and you can adjust the height of the trough to whatever height you want, whether it's on the ground, kids level, wheelchair level. If you're really tall, you can do that. So even if you have only one hand that you can work with, because it's so light, you don't have to worry about it. You can still work your hive. And by the way, if you're getting into your golden years, that makes it, that extends your beekeeping season, where a lot of people retiring are at the time in their life when they would like to enjoy a hobby and beekeeping, but they have to quit really fast because those boxes get so heavy, right? And now with this kind of beekeeping style, you don't have to. You can keep bees in your 90s, no problems, right? What I also like, and that's a side benefit, is that you can use those bars and stand them upside down, straight up. So you can take, they don't flop around like a frame would, right? So now you can take your pictures in peace. And unless there's a huge gust of wind, you have basically a built-in stand for your comb that you don't have to hold, and that frees up your hand to take pictures. So if I haven't convinced you about the benefit of the top-bar hives, the horizontal top-bar hives, there's a podcast I recorded a long time ago that's called The People's Hive of the Future, because the warrior hives are supposed to be the people's hive, but I think that this one is the people's hive of the future because it's so adaptable, so versatile, so accessible, and so sustainable. If I have convinced you to try Horizontal Hive, I want you to know there's also a blog entry on a website that's talking about how to convert a stackable box like a Langstroth or National in less than 6 minutes using very easy instructions. And basically the principles you can see here, this is, by the way, our plans, we have a whole bunch of plans for our hives on our websites, and they're all free and easily downloadable. But you can see the bottom left here, you've got the Langstroth or National Hive box that comes with a bottom board attached to it. And you cut it open to the shape of your horizontal hive after removing the end of your horizontal hive, and you attach it to it. And the bees, remember that horizontal expansion in the spring, when the bees will start building horizontally. So you're going to have the frame here serving as your guide to go straight. And at the first opportunity the bees have to go and build, they'll build into your top bar hive very naturally without you having to do anything. And it looks like this in practice. You have your box attached, and you'll have your frames in the regular box, and then the bees will build on the bars. How does it work? Well, you're going to have to put your frame straight, tight against the wall of the hive box. And by respecting bee space, your first bar will be touching those shoulders. In center to center, you'll have that 1 3/8 bee space. If your bars are 1 3/8 wide, you absolutely have to make sure your bars themselves are 1 3/8 wide. And so you can even get fancy and cut a little notch in the top of your box to use as a stopper for your bars so that they are respecting the right bee space. And all the instructions are on the blog entry. But that makes it very easy to grow something like top bar nukes, because your bees will build in the horizontal top bar hives. Whether it's a very large colony or just a single box or just a 5-frame nuke, that allows you to convert them very easily that way if you cannot find the top bar nukes. Now, let's talk about top bar nukes for a second. And again, I've got the context of being in the United States. I don't know about the UK, but these are in short supply and high demand, especially the standard kind that will fit in our hives. And so they sell for a whole lot more than Langstroth nukes. That makes it a niche market, right? That means if you're wanting to pay for some of your beekeeping expenses, you can start selling some of your splits and nukes in the spring. To give you an example, in Texas, they sell for $350. Now, the key here is also we're using treatment-free top bar nukes. And so that's a very important concept as well, is that when you have untreated bees, the comb is not contaminated. The genetics are resistant and tolerant of the mites, and they're naturally more resilient because of it. But it has to be basically locally adapted survivor stock. And I know we're not going to dive too much into that part of the natural beekeeping, but if I will warn you that if you have colonies of bees that are Italians treated genetics from commercial operations, for example, do not stop treating them because cold turkey, because they're relying on those treatments to stay alive and thrive, right? So what you're going to want to do if you have colonies and you're interested in that style of beekeeping is requeen with locally adapted survivor stock, or Russian genetics do really well naturally. And and use natural comb, that's going to help out as well. And at that point, understand bee biology and pest biology and what to do when you need to troubleshoot, and do it before it gets too late. But I'm not going to delve too much into that. That's just something, if you're interested, you can contact me and I can give you more information about, by the way. If you are wanting to start producing top bar hive nukes and hive boxes to our standards, we'll be happy to put you on our locator map to help you find customers. And we also have another locator map for treatment-free resource providers. So if you're one of the beekeepers that grow their bees without treatments, we're happy to put you on there so you can find customers as well. And as a side note, there's a Treatment-Free Beekeepers Facebook group. If you're interested in that kind of information and help to do beekeeping naturally, this is a good resource for y'all. So what's important to remember is in a horizontal natural comb top bar hive, you want to start it right and keep it right, because otherwise you're going to have cross combing galore, right? So that's one of the biggest complaints about top bars or natural comb, is the bees sometimes tend to want to do what they want to do. And it's not always what we want. And that makes it sometimes impossible to inspect, or really hard to not break a whole bunch of comb and feeling frustrated. So what's important in that case is to start it right. And one of the ways to start it right is using guides. And you can use ridges, you can use bamboo skewers, you can use crown molding, you can use popsicle sticks, you can use strips of foundation. My favorite way to start, if you've already gotten some top bar hives, is to actually give them a straight comb of natural comb. That will be their blueprint to keep building straight. As long as your bars are 1 3/8, they will keep building straight. But if you don't have that, these are some of the ways you can get them starting straight. The adapter, the flex hive, the conversion hive that I was talking about earlier, where you have your frames turning into top bar comb, is also a great way, because you've got a straight comb and the bees will follow it as a blueprint. So the next bar over doesn't need any of these guides, ridges, and anything like that. They will build it parallel to the last comb. And if it's respecting bee space, it will be center to center properly. So that's important to know. What happens if you have a problem with cross combing? Well, you can use something called repair bars. And you do it usually with brood's nests comb instead of honey, which tends to be more fickle and fragile. But that's the cocoon make the comb of the brood's nest a lot harder. So you can then rehang whatever's broken, whatever's you cut out to fix and put back in straight place with basically those hanging wires. So there's explanations on our Instagram on how to make that really easily, and it looks like this. And at that point, you can hang a comb from it and reattach it to a bar artificially. So that's basically the extent of what the top bar presentation is. But if you want to learn more and you're local or you're willing to travel, we have 3-day workshops several times a year, and we have one coming up in November. That's where Nikki's going to come down and visit with us, where we teach you natural bee biology and integrated pest management, and we get you into the bees and a lot of top bar hives to look at. And the 3rd day, we teach you how to build those hives very easily and assemble them. So we show you how to cut them and assemble them in less than 2 hours. We show you how to make the top bar nukes, the baby versions of them, for catching swarms, for transporting honey, for making splits, for rearing queens. And we also show you how to make swarm traps and all this stuff. So if you're interested, please join us. And you can download the free plans on the website. And you may even, if you're local to the US, order hives from us. We don't make any money from them, because we believe in this concept so much that we make the plans available for free, and we're supporting an Amish community that's producing them for us, and we sell them at cost. And they give us a really good price. So if you're interested in that, that's also an option. But with that, I'd like to open up the floor to some questions. I know I speak very fast, and we covered a whole lot of ground. So let me know if you have questions. And Christine, I'm going to start looking at some of the things that are in the chat.
Great, thanks so much, Nathalie. That was a really fabulous presentation. I'm just going to run through a few slides, but I'll try and keep it short, because I've seen there are already a dozen questions. Probably going to be more flooding in, and we've only left 20 minutes, which is like a minute a question at this rate. So I'll try and keep this quick. For those of you who don't know Bees Abroad, we're a beekeeping charity. We use beekeeping as a tool to enable rural communities to empower themselves. We've been operating for over 25 years, just 25 years next year officially. So a long legacy for our small charity. We teach beekeeping skills and honey production, how to make hives, but also value-added products like beeswax products that can fetch a high price, and teach communities how to use those products to generate a sustainable source of income. Lots of other interesting things going on in terms of complementary skills around businesses and accounting and things like that. Just quickly on this photo, I love this photo. So BC is one of our partnership managers. She's been involved with Bees Abroad from the beginning. She's a civil servant in the UK, very busy, high flying person, but finds the time to volunteer as a partnership manager. This is her with a community in Nigeria about 20 years ago. We've got our biggest Big Give ever coming up in December. So if you've enjoyed this event, we'd really appreciate a donation to the Big Give during the Big Give event. So that's 1 week where all donations are doubled. So if you are thinking about donating this week in December, the 3rd to the 10th is a great time because your money will be doubled. I'm just going to throw over to Nikki, and so she can say a few words about Bees Abroad in the USA.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks, Nathalie. That was great. Yeah, I just wanted to do a little shout out to our American listeners and watchers about our website that's sort of geared towards dollar donations rather than the UK site that handles the pound donations. So it's just beesabroad.org, and there you can easily, safely, and conveniently donate in dollars. And you can also get involved in some of the initiatives and programs that we have for donation. One of them I'd like to point out is called Hive Twinning. And that's where you can sign up. It's about $75. And you can pick a project that's available to twin with. You get exclusive updates. Nathalie, as we were talking about, is twinned with 4 of the projects. And again, it's called Hive Twinning. And if you have any questions, please email me. I'm happy to explain it and walk you through it. And on that note, just because we're in the US doesn't mean that we can't contribute to a very important Big Give donation. During December 3rd through the 10th, if you go to the .org.uk site, so that's beesabroad.org.uk, and then /Big Give, which will be on our site, of course. It's pretty easy. I'm probably making it sound way more complicated than it needs to be, but if you want to donate to that Big Give, just because we're here in the United States doesn't preclude you from it. You're very much welcome to and encouraged to during the December 3rd through 10th time period to go ahead and donate at the .org.uk site, so beesabroad.org.uk for the Big Give. It's our biggest fundraiser all year. We really rely on it to give that needed push for our organization to be able to sponsor, support, and create more projects in Africa. So again, I'm always available to answer questions as a supporter care manager. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm super friendly most of the time. And I'm going to start asking Nathalie some questions. One of the questions that I had for you, Nathalie, personally is I loved the idea of the divider in the top bar hive. Does the divider need to be a certain thickness to prevent the communication between the beehives? And do you use the divider for smaller colonies until they've grown up and then remove it when they need more space?
Those are great questions. So no, it doesn't need to be necessarily any kind of thickness, just the same way you would use in a national or Langstrasse dividers for smaller, 5-frame colonies, for example. Sometimes queen breeders do that. And so no, the key though is to have no communication between the two sides. So the 2 entrances are going to be 4 feet apart. So that's plenty of distance for them to not communicate from the outside. And then we use, because the wood is not always like super straight, or your cuts are not always super straight if you're not like a woodworker, we use acrylic based, low VOCs caulk to kind of like, once we've attached the partition, we're going to put some caulking on both sides of that partition. Also all the seams of the trough, which there are very few. That's another aspect that I didn't mention, because there's no frames or coverage or anything like that. There's very few places for small hive beetles and wax moth larvae to hide in the top bar hive, but we still want to caulk those, with those seams of the trough either with that non, toxic caulk, or with wood glue or something similar that's going to be non-toxic and low VOCs.
Good.
To
Oh,
discuss the
sorry.
other side of your question,
Yeah.
if you had smaller colonies, you could put them in a full-size horizontal hive, 4 feet long, and you could possibly put a partition closer, or use a follower board closer. The follower boards, we find that unless it's cut perfectly, if there's any gap between the wood and the partition itself, you might end up having hiding places for small hive beetles and for wax moths that the bees cannot defend as well. So we don't usually use them because we find it introduces more issues than benefits. However,
Right.
what you could do for a smaller colony, and we do it all the time, is if they haven't grown and winter's coming or whatever, we'll swap them over into a baby tabar nux that's going to be much more narrow, I mean, not as long, and have either 7 bars or 10 bars instead of 15 or 30 bars that we have for the larger colonies. And then
Makes
they
sense.
feel anytime, that's another tenet of natural beekeeping that works for any kind of beekeeping. When you have a struggling colony that's too small, a good thing, something that will usually help them a lot, is to compress them in a smaller cavity, so that the ratio of bees to comb increases, and the bees feel better. They're more able to protect their resources, their comb, and defend themselves from problems, and that usually helps them recover from problems that are caused by stress.
Okay, that kind of segues into another question we had, which is there ever a need for queen excluder a modification or use?
Oh, that's a great question. I didn't mention that. Yeah, no, you don't have to have a queen excluder. Remember the horizontal configuration where you had the bird's nest on one end by the entrance, which is where they need the airflow to aerate and maintain the temperatures the way they want them. They want it for the brood, and they store the surplus honey in the back, right? So the nest itself, where the brood is going to have a layer of honey at the top. And so when it gets cold or anything, they have that bird's nest is going to generate heat that's going to pull under the bar, making all that honey available much more easily than in a stackable, chimney effect kind of hive. But also, because of this configuration, the queen doesn't really like to cross over food barriers. And you see that in any kind of hives. But because of that horizontal configuration, that means all that surplus honey that was on the right side is not going to be contaminated by brood, contaminated, quote unquote. And
Right.
the queen will be restricting herself to the bird's nest area in the front of the hive. That means you don't need a queen excluder. One of the advantages of the horizontal tabar hives is that you can go to your bee yard with a bucket of bars and shims, maybe a little tabar nukes to harvest or do anything, splits or whatever, and nothing else. Right? So you're not transporting boxes, frames, all kinds of things, excluders. You don't need any of that. That's much more simple. That's much more efficient and easy to manage.
Do you supplement ever like bars from a very strong hive into a weaker hive, or do any sort of
Yes.
transferring?
I call that equalization, and I do that when I need to. And the horizontal configuration of any kind is going to be a whole lot easier than a vertical stack where you have to have the exact number of frames in your box, right? So if you remove a frame, if you're trying to give them a frame from another hive, you're going to have to make some space, right? And if you're pulling out of a hive that has resources to donate, you're going to have to make up that hole that you've just created. You're playing musical frames all the time with a vertical stack, right? With a horizontal configuration, you don't have to do that. You just make some space, slide in the bar that you want to give them, and everything's happy. You kind of squeeze it back in and close it. You might need a shim, you might need an adjustment at the end, but super easy. Same thing. If you're pulling it off a hive that's got a whole lot, you just take that comb, you put another empty bar, you're done.
That's amazing. I just love, my back is already singing the praises of this
Yes.
presentation. Can't
So
wait to learn more.
I
We have
wanna
a lot of
finish up.
questions about
Yeah.
using national or Langstroth hives inside of the configuration of the top barn. I think you kind of covered it. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to follow up with that and in any kind of
As
way?
far as the conversion, or
Yeah, can you take frames out of your Langstroth and put them in a top bar?
that's a good question. So not directly. So you cannot take a frame, a rectangular frame from either a Langstroth or a National, and pop it into the top bar. So there's a couple of options here. You can do what I was mentioning about the adapter, slapping the box open an entry to the top bar and remove the capping, basically the end cap of the top bar, and let them grow into the horizontal top bar hive that way, following the instructions on the blog, because you have to, there's some considerations you want to keep in mind. One of which being the food is an obstacle to expansion of the brood's nest. So you would have to put the brood towards the opening of the top bar and the food away, right? Because the food is going to be your excluder, right? And so you can, then they'll build in straight. And then the other thing that you could potentially do if you do not want to do that, if you have natural comb in your frames, which I encourage you to do for no matter what, because it's healthier for the bees. But you could make those repair bars, and you could take the frame, which is a big rectangle, and slice only in the center and maybe a little bit at the top, and to have a rectangle and attach it to that repair bar, hang it from there, and the bees will rebuild the ears to the shape of the hive, that half hexagon shape, right? What you don't want to do is take that rectangle and slice out triangles from the bottom, and that's going to be very traumatic, very distressful to the bees, and you're going to waste a whole lot of resources that way. Plus, it's going to be a mess. So, the repair bar version of converting is kind of a already enough, manipulations. We don't really encourage that. I'd rather encourage an easy adapter, and it takes less than 10 minutes to do, really, honestly. So that's the way I would recommend to do for that.
Okay. A kind of a interesting little topic. If you don't have a nuke, a top bar nuke to start out with, but you've got your equipment, are these easy to catch swarms in? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, so you do it the same way as you would with any other hive style. You would bait it with, meaning maybe some old comb. You could rub some beeswax. You could rub some propolis, maybe a little bit of lemongrass essential oil, and then all the other conditions. I would use a nuke box, a top bar nuke box, so a smaller version that you could hang up and down, put anywhere you want to, following the same principles as you would as any other swarm trap, right? It's the same thing. Now
That's
we find that rough zone interior, and even in a regular size 4 feet turbo hive works really well and attracts the bees readily on I mean, we see that all the time. They seem to love them. So even if you don't have them suspended or anything, that happens. If you're in Africa, put them in the shade. Actually, more often than not, it's not just Africa, but especially Africa, they need to go in the shade. So 80% of the swarm traps will be populated, according to some studies, as opposed to the ones that are in the full sun that almost never attract bees. And so follow this Dr. Seeley principles for a lot of that stuff. But
yeah, brilliant guy. Is there any issues that you have with the bees attaching comb to the walls? I mean, I'm assuming that if you use the correct bee space, then that takes care of itself. But
absolutely, and that's a great question. So the attachment to the walls happen when you have the wrong angle, and when the structural integrity of the comb requires bracing. And so the more vertical the angle, the more they're going to want to brace the comb, right? So having that 30-degree angle and that shallower depth really makes a huge difference. The bees don't attach the combs at all when we are working them. The only time it happens is if for any reason we have a comb that we push towards when we close it back, and that beeswax comb is too close to the wall because we slid the bar too far out and there's a much further gap on the other side. That violates bee space. They might attach that one side. But other than that, they don't really attach that's the difference. So I have two kinds of top bar hives. I've worked with several kinds. And the Phil Chandler's, the Christy Hemingway, the one that looks more like a pizza shape, that's deeper and just more straight up and down walls. They attach those all the time, but not in the Les Crowder style hives.
Okay. Yeah, so we got a kind of an interesting question that kind of was on my mind as well in the chat, and it really has to do with, a lot of top bar hive use in Texas, where it's quite warm most of the year, and in Africa, of course. if I'm in Michigan, how do I overwinter these successfully? Do I need to add additional top, or is there more, insulation required, or how was an overwintering in a long winter snowy
So that's
climate?
a good question. So first of all, the horizontal configuration improves the thermodynamics of the colony, the nest, the cavity, right? Because you don't have the loss of heat above the bird's nest like you would have in a stack. So right there, you've already have a much better configuration. Because it's horizontal and you don't have to lift boxes and stack them up, you can make that box much thicker and you can wrap it just the same way you would a regular hive as well. We're in Texas, so we like to put all our colonies in the shade because it gets really hot in the summer and it's counterproductive for the bees. But mostly we like to have the rain cover offering airflow over the bars. So there's, a carport effect. But in colder climates, you can just kind of contain that with your roof and just make sure that if you have a roof over that's got an air gap, that you are allowing the heat to get out in the summer. And if you have the roof that's closer to the hives, make sure that it's not metal directly in contact with your bars, because obviously metal is going to heat up quite a lot.
Yeah.
But you can shove insulation on top of the bars. Just keep in mind those bars are already, we use 2-inch lumber. Actually, our Amish provided hives are more than 1.5-inch thick. And so you have that thickness of the bar on top of the bird's nest that's already providing all that insulation. The other thing that, which is a lot more than a lot of hives out there. And then the other thing that you might be interested, so you could add foam boards, pillows of wool, anything you would do with a regular stackable hive. And I don't know if you're aware of the Hive Hugger product in the United States. That's basically a wrap system with a vacuum crown. That's a R36. That's very highly insulated. And that's where you want the insulation is at the top of the hive. And they now carry, they've developed for us, for Be Mindful, a Hive Hugger product that fits our plans of hives. So if you're really worried about your hives in the US, you can do that.
Okay. I know we're running a little bit out of time now, and I don't even know if we really want to kind of get into this, but it has come up a couple times. So how do you're a natural beekeeper. I'm assuming that you don't substitute feeding, and did you want to discuss, if you did do any substitute feeding, how you would go about that in this hive configuration?
Yeah, so you have so we recommend in hive feeding when you have an emergency. So we don't recommend prophylactic feeding all the time. We do provide emergency feeding if we need to. One of our favorite ways to do equalization and provide basically resources from another hive that has too much. So honey, nectar, things like that. The second way is that you can actually provide sugar syrup inside the cavity, the hive. In the back where the floor of the hive is available, you can put a vacuum jar upside down. So you have a jar that's hermetic, but you poke some holes in there and then you put it upside down on top of two pencils, whatever. As long as it fits under the bars, it's going to allow the bees to come and visit in the back, and it's inside the hive instead of being open feeding, which can create a whole host of problems, right? And then you can also make yourself a top bar feeder. So we're about to put the plans for those. It's basically a top bar with the a plywood shaped in the half hexagon configuration on both sides with a little spacer to provide a container that's kind of a half hexagon that allows the bees, with a slot on the plywood that allows the bees to get in there. So you can pour syrup by filling in that container and have it shaped to the hive as well. So there's various, you have to, it's not really commercially available, but you can make them very easily.
Okay. I think the final question to wrap up with is probably the best question that I could think of. Thanks, Anthony, for providing this one. So this will be our last question for the presentation, but he says, what is stopping hobbyist beekeeping from switching to top bar hives approach to beekeeping? Why is this not more popular, especially in the US and of course, okay.
So nothing is stopping backyard beekeepers from doing this. Absolutely nothing. And the reason it's not more popular is because the industry is pushing frame beekeeping, because they sell their products, they sell their nukes, they sell all their beekeeping style. And a lot of backyard beekeepers are just following commercial beekeeping practices, not understanding they have other options. And so we're working on that. We're working on letting people know they don't have to follow commercial beekeeping practices, because they're not transporting their hives everywhere, and they don't have to stack them up. They don't have to break their backs or their bank trying to follow those commercial beekeeping practices. And they can do it all themselves, much more simpler, in a much more simple way, right? So it's a matter of counter narrative, Anthony. I appreciate the question, because we are working on that really heavily, and that's why we're making our plans available for free. We're doing all kinds of presentations. We're just kind of really beating that drum. But yeah, thank you.
No, thanks, Nathalie. That was amazing. And I'll push it over to Christine to finish up.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really fascinating, and thanks everyone for being so engaged and submitting all your questions. I will be sending out a post-event email via anyone who signed up to our newsletter via the Eventbrite page, with links and resources to what Nathalie does, and information from this event. So keep an eye out for that. A big thank you, a huge thank you to Nathalie for her time and expertise. Really incredible talk. There are just countless messages on the chat about how much everyone enjoyed it. And a huge thank you to all of you who did donate via Eventbrite. These events aren't free to put on. Eventbrite does charge. It takes our time. And so we really appreciate those of you who've donated via Eventbrite. And for those of you who still want to support us, I'd encourage you to follow that link during the big give week, when all donations will be doubled. I'll include a link to that in the post-event email as well. Someone made an amazing donation of around £100, which will buy half a dozen hives for one of our beekeeping communities. So that was a really incredible donation, and a huge thank you to that person. But if you enjoyed this as much as a pint in the pub, that's about £5, or probably more like 6 or 7 these days. So like have a think about, was it a pint in the pub? Was it a meal out? How much did you value this? Of course, we just really appreciate you just being here, and we know many of our long-term supporters are here with us today, and so we just want to say thank you for your time and your support to us as a charity and as a community. So we'll follow up, as I said, with an email post event. And if there's anything you'd like to say, Nikki or Nathalie.
I would like to say thank you, everyone. And if you'd like me to come and present to your local club or anything, I can do that via Zoom, and I'm happy to travel if need be. But I'm happy to share the word and help support your club in the process as well.
Thanks so much, Nathalie. And with that, I think we'll close up and let everyone have the rest of their evenings or days in the US.
And please give. We love you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.